I'm too productive. Hey there, welcome back to my channel, String Things by Mel. My name is Melissa. I'm a stay-at-home mom living in Vancouver, Canada, and this is episode 24 of my monthly knitting podcast. I have lots to share with you guys. I have 4 finished objects. Very much the theme for February was finish it February unintentionally, but that is what happened. So let's just jump in and start with what I am wearing, which is my Haley Genser or Haley sweater. The pattern for this one, you need to have a physical copy. As far as I know, there is no online or digital version of the pattern. And the booklet that this comes out of is Double Sunday 2111, so 2111. And I'll show you the picture here. So the pattern booklet is a little bit of an older one. Tiberius walked by. So it could be hard to find. If you cannot find it, unfortunately, I don't know how else you can find this pattern. So that's the unfortunate part. But there is a couple patterns I've seen that might be good substitutes or alternatives. They're not direct dupes for the sweater. But I came across these recently, and it's the Minto sweater from Knitonomy and the Minu sweater from Knitting Deer on Instagram. And Tiberius is being a cat and knocking things off the table right now, if you can hear that. The Minu sweater, the cardigan version is out, but the pattern hasn't been released yet, but something to put on your radar, perhaps. My version is knit up using Cascade 220, which is the worsted weight, non-superwash, and the color is called Camel. And I used exactly 6 skeins of this yarn. Originally, the yarn was purchased to use for a Moby sweater, but I decided I just didn't see myself wearing Moby sweater in the color camel for whatever reason. So I was lucky that the yarn requirements for the smallest size of the Moby sweater was the same as for this Haley Genser. And this is from a Double Sunday book. So the pattern suggested yarn is Double Sunday plus a strand of the tin silk mohair. But I was able to get gauge with 5mm needles. Pattern is 5.5mm needles. So I made no modifications to the pattern itself. I followed the instructions exactly as is for size extra small. And somehow, despite doing that, my sweater came out slightly different in size, different from the given measurements for the pattern. But I'm really happy that it turned out that way. So the given measurements from this pattern are chest circumference, the front length, and the sleeve length. And it's the front length and the sleeve length where mine is different from the pattern. My sleeves are about 4 centimeters longer than what the pattern says, but it works for me. I do have a little bit longer arms, but the fact that I didn't really modify it to be longer could just be I had knit with a different tension on the sweater versus my swatch as well. And then the front length, mine ended up being about 13 centimeters shorter than the pattern for size extra small. And I'm really happy that turned out that way, because now the front, it ends just past my hips, and that's a more flattering length for me. If it was longer, I would lose more of my shape, and the silhouette I don't think would have been very flattering for me. So I'm very happy that it turned out to be shorter. Again, still not sure how that happened, but happy accident. It's just an example of you can do as much as you can. You gauge swatch, you you count your rows and you do the math, and sometimes it still doesn't turn out as expected. But for the most part, I feel pretty lucky that when this has happened on garments, it has happened, like it's been a positive result for me. But yeah, I'm just kind of waiting till it doesn't work out. But I consider myself a very lucky girl. So I did have a question on my last episode about how I keep track of the cable crosses. So what I do to keep track of the cable crosses is I just use stitch markers. There is a chart to follow in the pattern, so you can kind of mark off which row you are on. But I was able to memorize the chart from this one once I finished the upper part of the back. The pattern the chart anyways, was pretty intuitive and I didn't really have to look at it anymore. So I used stitch markers to help keep track of where I was. And what I like to do is wherever there is a cable cross, whatever column is going to cross over, I always put the stitch mark in one that's going to cross over. So the stitches that you would hold in the front, that way you can always see them and can easily count from that stitch marker. In response to that comment in my last video, I did post a link to a short video from Lyons, who shows how you can, tell which row you did the cable cross on or not. I'll link it again in case anyone's curious and didn't see that in my last episode. On the sweater, when you're transitioning from the pattern body into the ribbing, you have to decrease stitches. And in the pattern, it doesn't tell you exactly how to decrease. It just says to decrease this many stitches evenly around. So if you ever have trouble figuring out like how many knits should I do before I do another decrease or so on, I use a knitting calculator from worldknit.com. And what you just do, it's a free calculator. You put in how many stitches you have and how many decreases you need to do, and it will tell you the exact instructions or formula on how to do decreases. So for example, it could say, knit 5, knit 2 together, knit 5, like repeat. And it will give you the instructions for a balanced decrease. There's also an increase calculator on there as well. So it's a very handy tool. And again, that's worldknit.com. There is one slight modification I did do from the pattern on my sweater. So when you are doing that decrease round, it says to either use a knit 2 together or purl 2 together, depending on, how the stitches appear. And I was kind of doing that, and I was thinking, like, is that based on what the first stitches did? But what if the second stitch is a purl? So then should I purl 2 together or should I knit 2 together? I wasn't quite sure, and then it ended up looking very messy. So I ripped back and decided to treat the decrease round as a stockinette round and only did knit 2 togethers and then knit every single stitch regardless of what the stitch pattern was doing. And that turned out to be a lot cleaner. So I would recommend that if you are going to do this sweater. And on the end of the body and the sleeves and as well as the collar, it's all 1x1 full twisted rib. And I finished mine with Italian bind off, but of course twisted Italian bind off. And it's nearly the same mechanics as regular Italian bind off, except you need to work through the back loop of every single stitch. And it turned out very neat, in my opinion. And so that's everything I have to say about my Haley Genser. The next finished object I want to show you guys is the Viola tee that I've made for my daughter Darcy. This one I finished, well, I was already on the body, working in the round, and I really didn't have much further to go, so I did finish it pretty quickly. You may notice that it does have short sleeves, so the pattern is for short sleeves, but I wanted to see if I could get a long sleeve top out of a single skein, and unfortunately did not have enough. How I figured that out was I started kind of like knitting, working on the sleeve and doing some calculations based on weighing out my yarn and how much was being used for, say, 1 round or 2 rounds, and then calculating how many rounds I would need for a full-length sleeve. And it turned out that I had enough yarn only to do one full-length sleeve. So ended up just doing short sleeves, but that's okay. This is the size 3 to 4 years. If you make the smallest size, maybe you could get long sleeves out of a single skein, but don't take my word for it. The yarn I used is from Entre Soeurs at Laine, and the colorway is called Abracadabra. Darcy really likes the colors in this one, and it fits her great. So it is a tee with some positive ease, but it's really cozy, and she can just wear this. There's no sweater, and she's warm enough, but she's also someone that runs quite warm. So that's the Viola tee for Darcy. As you can see, I've done a little wardrobe change. My next finished object, and for myself, obviously. This is my Paul sweater. The pattern's from Moreca Knit, and I've knit up this size 3. And that is because I wanted to have more positive ease than recommended. Otherwise, I think maybe a size 2, definitely. I think size 1 would not have been the silhouette or fit that I would have liked. So I quite like size 3. This sweater and the Haley Genser have nearly the same amount of positive ease on me, but it doesn't seem like that. I feel like the Haley Genser kind of hides how much positive ease there is, because after the underarm, the fabric seems to kind of cling a little bit, and in a good way. So that's been something nice about the Haley Genser, is that I have more than 20 centimeters of positive ease, yet it doesn't wear like that on my body. Now, that's not to say that the Paul sweater looks very oversized, but it does look more oversized because the fabric just behaves a bit differently. There is a really nice drape to this fabric, but it doesn't come in and like cling to my body like the Haley Genser does, and that could just be because maybe the cables add to the clinginess. So mine is, as I said, size 3, and I used one of Elisa's newest bases, Someday Fibre Co. The base is called Aura Sport. It's 50% Surrey alpaca, 50% merino wool. It's a 3-ply sport weight, and I use the color Rosewood. And this is all that I have left over. I think, I can't remember how much it weighs, but it's not very much. Like, it's not enough to like make a hat. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I might use it to make the dress or clothing for Darcy's bear, which I have not finished. Worked on it a little bit this month, but it's just a project that has too many interruptions, because the rounds are short because it's a little bear, and then you got to read the next instructions because of all the shaping that needs to be done, especially in the section that I'm at. So it's just not, doesn't have enough rhythm for me to really enjoy it right now. So I've not been giving it as much attention as I should be. So this sweater is worked top down, and there is kind of a saddle shoulder construction. This one does not have a contiguous saddle shoulder, so you do create the saddles first, and then come back and you will pick up stitches for the front and the back, and then stitches for the sleeve are picked up and worked in around from there. There is very deep, quite a significant length of ribbing on the end of the sleeves and on the end of the body. After working so much twisted rib on this sweater and then immediately switching to work on this sweater, and then it's 1x1 rib, but on 3mm needles, my wrists, my forearms, my hands, just not very happy with what I was working on, but I was very determined to get it done. So I did work through the pain a little bit, but then I did give myself some break after. I had a bit of a break of a few days of just only knitting stockinette and limiting my knitting time after working on these. And like the Haley Genser, I finished with Italian bind off, but just regular Italian bind off because it's regular 1x1 rib. An amazing thing about the yarn that I used, it is hand dyed, it is tonal, but I did not do any color yarn management. I've heard of people doing helical knitting or alternating skeins when they work with hand dyed yarn, but I didn't do any of that. I just used the yarn up, used a full skein, joined the next skein, and the color is quite even. Like, I don't think you can tell where I switched. You might tell a little bit here. So after I joined in the round, that's where I switched to the next skein. And you can kind of see it. And then there's one sleeve. So this one, I don't know. One of the sleeves, there's like the tiniest bit of pooling, but that's it. And yeah, that's just, proof of how well Elise dyes her yarn. I think this is the first kind of tonal I've used from her, I think, though. Anyway, very happy with how the color turned out, very happy with how the color looks on me. This was a bit of a brave, bold choice for me, even though this isn't a bold color, but I'm very happy I picked it, very happy I have it. Elise does not currently have Rosewood available. I don't know if it's one of the core colors, but a similar looking color would be her rosy color, which is, I believe, one of her core colors. And rosy would be, of course, a bit more pink. And Rosewood is a little bit more, got orange undertones in there. Now, size-wise, pre-blocking versus post-blocking, everything blocked out as it was supposed to. So I didn't really pin too much of the sweater out, like in terms of like the body. The ribbing, I did put in some blocking pins to help kind of open up the ribbing and getting it to the right circumference. And also the saddle, making sure that was lying flat. So otherwise, I typically just lay my garments flat to dry without any major pinning action happening. And so compared to the given measurements in the pattern, my circumference is 3 centimeters smaller. Perhaps if I did actually pin it out, I could get it to exact measurements, but close enough for me. Total length, I'm only 0.5 centimeter shorter than the pattern. Maybe it will grow a little bit with wear. I find the measurements change a little bit after some wear, so maybe I'll remeasure this, but I'm happy with how it turned out, so probably won't. And then upper arm circumference, I have the exact same as the pattern, and the pattern didn't give any sleeve length measurements, but I knit according to the instructions, and the sleeves are really nice length. They are shorter than my Haley Genser by a little bit. I would say maybe a couple centimeters, about 1 inch only. But yeah, I'm really digging the wide sleeves now. Last year me would say, oh, no, I can't roll my sleeves up. I can't do anything. But that's just part of me being in a different mom phase. I think I've said before, because Darcy is potty trained, so I'm not cleaning out, changing her diaper, not having to worry about, poop getting on my sleeves. So yeah, so you'll probably see more wide sleeves in the future, perhaps. I had a question in my last episode based on something that I was doing for this sweater, and that was using my gauge to know how many rows or rounds to knit. I don't use a measuring tape while I'm working on a project. I don't measure out my whip because that's inaccurate. All the measurements given in a pattern are based on blocked gauge. So measuring your unblocked fabric won't give you the right measurements. So, for example, if the pattern says to knit 8 inches, so knit the body for 8 inches, then in this case, the gauge for rows or rounds is 31 stitches for 4 inches or 10 centimeters. So to get 8 inches, that means I would need to knit up 62 rounds to achieve 8 inches based on that blocked gauge that I have. And that's how I work on every garment. I don't pull out the measuring tape again until I need to measure the final garment once it's all done. Now, when it comes to sleeves, I will pull it out as a reference, but not to measure the actual sleeves. So I can look at the pattern and it might say something like, or based on a schematic, it'll say the sleeves are 45 centimeters. So what I'll do is I'll, kind of guesstimate where the sleeve is going to start and hang my measuring tape and see where 45 centimeters would end up and kind of think about, will that be enough? Also, could do a mid-project blocking just to make sure the shoulder is at the right spot in order to kind of make that measurement as well, which is something that I did with the Haley Genser because I was really not sure how much the cables were going to block out this way, which would contribute to sleeve length. So I did do a mid-project block and then hung my measuring tape to see whether the given measurement in the pattern would be the right sleeve length for me. So my advice, don't measure your whip. Use your gauge, and it's just kind of simple math. What you can also do is, so not all the measurements are going to be very easy, like 8 inches, where you can just double your row gauge. What I like to do is get that down to, what is it, stitches per centimeter or per inch, for example. So I like to work in centimeters. So if the gauge is 31 centimeters per 10 centimeters, then I know it's 3.1 rounds per centimeter. So if it says to knit 12 centimeters, then I would say, and then I would do 3.1 times 12, and then that would give me the number of rounds I need to do for 12 centimeters. So that's a really quick, dirty version of how I math out all my lengths for all my whips. Okay, guys, last object I have to share with you, and it might come as a surprise because I don't think I showed too much of this on Instagram, and this wasn't even a thing at my last episode, but I made another Levitate wrap, and I did it in 10 days. Um, yeah. Uh, I cast this one on Super Bowl Sunday and didn't actually work on it that day. I worked on it in the car on the way to our friend's place. And then, yeah, it got done quickly because I don't know, you may or may not have noticed how I sound, but my family, we've all been sick for the last half of February. I got sick first. I missed my volleyball game, and then Darcy got sick. She had a fever for several days. And then I got sick again. My husband was sick. So a lot of time spent at home on the couch watching TV, watching movies, quiet games. Darcy really did not have a lot of energy. She was also like so tired. She was napping during the day. So naturally I knit while she was napping because I was also too tired to really do anything else other than the very basics like laundry and simple basic cooking. So yeah, this got done in 10 days. Perks of being sick, I suppose. Not that shouldn't be a thing though. And I used Drops Baby Merino in the color Sage. This is some yarn I bought last year, which I thought I was going to make some sort of other long sleeve top. It was one of those things like, I just really want that yarn. I want to try it. I like the color. I had even cast on a different project with this yarn. I had cast on the Poppy Tea, but put that one down because I wasn't liking the feel of this yarn for that. It just didn't feel like a good match of pattern and yarn for myself. And then, I've been thinking how much I would love to have another Levitate wrap. Couldn't decide what color. And sage is my favorite color, so let's just go with it. So I decided to hold this yarn double and swatch. It worked out. I even used the suggested needle size, which is 6mm needles. For my first version of my Levitate wrap, I sized down to 5.5. I probably didn't need to, but if you've seen my vlog about the Levitate wrap, I got a little impatient and just kind of started knitting without my swatch being fully dried. You know, I'm not always perfect, okay? I know I say about to engage and all that. Sometimes I'm a rebel against my own process, my own logic, okay? Um, so I originally had only 8 balls of this yarn, and so I knew that I was short, and I decided to knit it up anyways because I figured it's a commercial yarn, pretty readily available. I would be able to order more of it, not care about dye lot being different. And so I got pretty far. So I did have to run out to one of my local yarn shops. So luckily, Wet Coast Wools carries drops baby merino, and they had sage in stock. So the 8 balls of yarn that I had got me through the entire body, all of the sleeves. I purchased 2 additional balls to do all of the double knitting. I didn't need 2. I would have been fine with just 1, but since I was holding this double and I wanted to get through as much of the double knitting without being interrupted by having to join new yarn, I bought 2. And I had store credit on file there, so I only paid $3 to buy 2 balls of yarn, so it worked out. So yeah, I used the 2 balls of yarn for all of the double knitting and for like along here and on the bottom and for the ribbon ties. Did not have to rejoin yarn at all, didn't come across any knots in the balls of yarn, so that was really nice. And initially, because I was doing or playing yarn chicken, I was considering lengthening this one, but I was still in yarn chicken mode, so I decided not to. But then I ended up buying more yarn, so I could have, but anyways. So this one turned out quite similar to my first version, if not exactly the same. I did measure it after I blocked it, and it seemed to have come out shorter than the first version, which I thought was strange. I mean, I did put it in the dryer, so maybe it shrunk a bit, but hear me out. So this is a superwash yarn, and I wash it like I normally wash the non-superwash stuff by putting it in my tub to soak. And then when I pulled it out, like squeezed out all the water and everything, the fabric seemed very open. The stitches seemed very open. And if you can imagine a really fluffy dog, like a Pomeranian, when they get wet and their fur just like onto their body, that is what I imagine happened with the yarn. Even though it is held double, it just was like lost any kind of fluff or bloom. And so I was worried. I thought, well, my swatch didn't do this. But at the same time, it looked like my fabric grew a lot. I was like, oh man, did I accidentally stretch this out? I hope not. And I laid it out, and I'm doing my measurements to make sure it's laying in the measurements that it needs to be. And the sleeves, I kid you not, were 10 centimeters too long. I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to have to go back and frog. I mean, I will do it if they're too long, but I don't want to have to. And then I was looking at the sleeve, and I thought, oh, well, it looks really pulled out, looks really skinny. So, I kind of like spread out the sleeve to get it to the right circumference. And, that shrunk it down a bit, but not the whole 10 centimeters. So I was just kind of hoping like maybe like I know what my gauge is. I followed the instructions. Maybe just like maybe it'll just come back down. I don't know. And it did. So what happened, or as this was drying, I noticed the sweater was like retracting a bit, and the fabric was becoming a little bit more dense. The spaces were filling up. So what I think was going on is that this yarn is cable spun. It feels very elastic. Like if you hold this fabric and you like pull it, like knit fabric does have, some stretch, some give to it, but this one feels like it's got more bouncy elasticity to it than my first version, for example, which is made out of non-superwash undyed wool. And so when it was wet versus dry, I think when it was wet, the cable spun yarn was just kind of like stretched out a bit. And then as it dried, it had, the memory to come back to its original shape, original length. And I'm happy that it did because then my sleeves, my notes here, yeah, they did come back all the way down to the length that they needed to be, which is kind of crazy how it, if I had just left it and not fixed the like circumference of it and just left it as is, would it have known to retract that much? But anyways, I hope that makes sense. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting, and drops the description of this yarn. It does say to knit with a tighter tension with this yarn because of it being cable spun, and you can kind of like get the idea of that if you look at the end of my cuff here, where I've used 4mm needles. You can see how kind of neat and tidy the stitches are, and my stitches are relatively tidy. And this is where I've used the 6mm needles, but you might be able to see a little bit of that wormy texture. I'm using the word wormy because if you've ever knit with velvet yarn, like chenille yarn, especially crochet, and it just is kind of irregular, bumpy, that's a little bit of how I would describe what happened with this yarn. But it's okay. And I thought it was also interesting that even though that this is held double, there's still that bit of pinstriping action that can happen when you use superwash yarn. But I'm okay with it. I think it still looks pretty tidy. But I'm very happy to have a superwash version, a lighter version, that I'm going to bring this on my vacation. I think this would be a great little wrap to wear on the plane, and maybe as like a little cover up, because I don't know if it's really going to be that hot in March, but I also run kind of cool, and I think this is like a stylish option as well. And yeah, so this is Levitate wrap number 2. Couple of quick notes about my Levitate wraps. Both are knit exactly as is instructed for size extra small. However, because I get questions a lot about this, it doesn't look like the sample photos for the pattern, and which also makes me question what size and how much ease the model is wearing. So I chose extra small, and that gives me about 25, up to 25 centimeters of positive ease. That measurement is a bit tricky because of the wrap style cardigan that it is. It's somewhat adjustable. And I did knit it to the pattern's length. However, it does come out a bit more cropped looking on me. I do have a somewhat long-ish torso. Now, it the result is that it looks different on me than it does on the sample photo, but I like how mine turned out. I like that it has less positive ease than the recommended amount of 30 to 35 centimeters of positive ease, and I like that it's more cropped for me because that's more my style and accentuates my figure. I just remembered something. Uh, I've had questions about how the wrap secures and if there's any like weird bunching that happens. So let's see if I can do this. So I only use one snap right here, because if you follow the pattern says to also do a snap here, so that you'd have two, one kind of on the inside, one on the outside. However, what I discovered when you do that on my first version, when you put a snap here, it pulls this up, especially when you put your arms up, and then it just starts to kind of like sit funny. And then you can see that after, like, this is blocked, I didn't pin this down to block, just laid it flat, it curves up. So then that also contributes to it kind of like pulling everything up. So I have found just a single fastener on the side closest to where the ribbons are tied works for me. And then the inside flap seems to just stay where it is. I will admit that this one, it moves a little bit more than the first version. My first version being like wool. There's like more Velcro action is how I would describe it. So it like just sits where it needs to, whereas this is superwash, merino, and it's a bit smoother. So there's a bit more like less friction, I guess. But so far I haven't had any issues with it like popping out too much. But yeah, just wanted to mention that about how this wrap closes and secures. So that's all the finished objects I have to share for the month of February. And see, I have a little bit of time left, so I have a couple whips to share. Well, only one whip actually. One of them I just realized is not really even a whip yet, but we'll get there. So I am doing a test knit for my friend Sarah, Noelle Knits. She's got the pattern for the adult version of the Hannah cardigan, which I tested for her last year. I think that's her first pattern. Yes. So anyway, this is a half fisherman's rib cardigan with a drop shoulder V-neck opening with a double knit button band. I am using some yarn I already had in my stash because that's a theme that we're going to try to stick to this year, is using yarn from my stash. And I'm using the Knit Picks palette bear, the same yarn, bear yarn I'm using for my bear, Darcy's bear, but B-A-R-E, bear. And I've already worked the upper back yoke and the fronts, and now I've joined all the fronts with the back, so I'm now working back and forth. It looks really scrunched up because I haven't switched out my needles, so I've got a bit of a short cable for the length that I'm working on, and I've got all my markers here for all the increases that I've done for the front. But yeah, it's just got a lovely little shoulder detail for the back, and it's very, very similar to the children's version. Except for, I think this detail is like slightly different because I think that's just a result of, what grading, what needed to be done for an adult versus a child size cardigan. The fabric feels very squishy right now. I feel like this is something that can be very warm because there's lots of air that can be trapped in the fibers. And yeah, so I'm using 4mm needles. The suggested needle size is 4.5, but I'm a loose knitter. I also kind of like that because I think that's how I get away with knitting so much, is that by using smaller needles and not, making my hands grip so tight, I'm more relaxed while I knit. So I think that's contributes to why I can knit so much and knit so consistently as well. So that is something that I'm working on. The deadline is not till April. So this is something that I've worked very on and off since casting on. I did cast on right when the test started. And so I'm not worried about finishing that in time because the deadline's in April. And, well, you guys know how fast I can knit. I mean, this was knit in 10 days, which I think is a problem. I say I want to slow down. I say I want to knit fewer things, but I'm too productive, which I don't think many knitters say. And so I have a bit of a dilemma that I need to work on, I suppose. And yeah, need to work on more things for Darcy, but the bear, like something like that does like lacks rhythm, has not been very fun. So I need a project that has good rhythm, and good feel to it, to keep me engaged. Otherwise, I'm just going to be adding to my whip mountain. For those of you who have seen my spring and summer knitting queue video, the next thing that I'm about to share with you should be familiar then. Oh yeah, so yeah, I filmed that video last week, that came out last week, and when I was sharing this project in there, I had just joined the fronts with the back. Like that's so in less than a week, I finished all the sleeves, like all the sleeves. Like there's so many sleeves, both sleeves, and all the double knitting. I'm crazy. So now I have caked up the Is It Navy or Black yarn from Fireweed Fibre. And I'll just pull out the skein that is not wound up as well for comparison, but I'm very excited about this color. I discovered though that with it being so dark, I don't like working on it at night. I was trying to work on a swatch last night while my husband was watching hockey, and normally when we watch TV, we have the lights low, and yeah, I had to move over to our table so that I could see better, and I realized that this might be the daytime project when Darcy's at preschool. But here's the yarn. It's very dark, gorgeous, rich, navy black. And here it is caked up. Just like beautiful. I don't show much emotion when I talk about yarn and things like that, but this is one of those things and I'm just like, it's beautiful, guys. But I'm also like, this is me happy, this is me sad. I get it from my dad, I swear. So I've started swatching up for Camisole number 4, which I don't know if you can really see anything. My tension is not the greatest for this. This is like it's like a broken rib, but it's like a broken double rib because you have 2 knits, 2 purls instead of a single knit, knit, purl. Pattern repeat. And so my knit columns look a little, but maybe that's something I can correct when I actually start knitting up the top. I'm having trouble getting good rhythm. So this is a sock yarn, but the pattern says to use 3.5 millimeter needles. The suggested yarn in the pattern is Knitting for Olive Pure Silk or the Cotton Merino, which I would say like the Pure Silk is lighter weight than this yarn that I'm using, and so using 3.5 millimeter needles will result in like really good drape. So I accept that I'm not going to get the same drape as a silk yarn or even the cotton merino yarn, but I'm using a sock yarn because I want better durability, longevity, and memory. Like I don't want this to stretch out too much, especially because it is in a rib stitch pattern. So that is something I fully accept by making this yarn substitution. But yeah, it's normally this kind of weight of yarn, you would use something like 3 millimeters or smaller. So yeah, I haven't been able to get a good flow while I'm working on this swatch. And when I don't have a good flow, then my fingers start to, ache a bit because they're trying to figure out how to adjust to this given yarn needle combination. So I didn't get very far on the swatch. maybe half done. And I put it down because when my hands start hurting, I need to tell myself to stop and not get to the point of like it's painful. So this is something I'll just kind of slowly work on. I don't need this to be done for vacation. I want it to get to the point where it's an easy to work on project during vacation. So ideally, I would have the top done, like all the triangles. So it's work top down. Yeah, I do the triangles for the front and the back, and then join in the round. And I'd like to be at that point by the time we leave for vacation, which is in just over 2 weeks now. Yeah. So hopefully I can get there. If not, maybe on the plane, I can work on it. But it is Darcy's first time on the plane as well, so we'll see how that goes, hopefully. Yeah. I hope it's not too stressful. I'm kind of telling myself like there's going to be a certain amount of stress, but yeah, we'll deal with it when we get there. And I do have one more thing to share with you guys because I lack self-control. The impulsive side kicked in recently. PetiteKnit has been teasing about a pattern that she's working on with a Sager or Isayer. Not sure how to pronounce that. But the pattern dropped yesterday. And you know what I did? I bought the pattern and I swatched for it. It just looks really cool. I'm really digging the texture. Like the knit ways of arranging the knits and the pearls. And I already swatched it. I swatched with Fisherman's Wool from Lyons brand. And I've pretty much hit gauge. While it was drying, I was kind of doing some measurements. I was like, oh, it's pretty close. And so, yeah. So Lion brand Fisherman's Wool, I've used 5mm needles like the pattern says. And yeah, I think it looks pretty good, the fabric. The pattern says to hold like a DK with a couple strands of fingering. So it is like a worsted weight pattern. The stitch gauge is 16 stitches by 24 rows. And yeah, so now the next question is whether I can resist casting this on and like finish my swatch at least for Camisole number 4 and get that going. But I'm just like very excited to work on this one because I have been dying to work with Fisherman's Wool for quite some time. In my spring summer knitting video, I shared these tweed swatches and on Instagram, and this is with Fisherman's Wool. I've just been like trying to find a project to use Fisherman's Wool. But yeah, in case you guys haven't seen it, so these are my swatches I made with the Make It Tweed Fisherman's Wool, and this one's Drops Brushed Alpaca. And this one, instead of Drops Brushed Alpaca, it's We Are Knitters Touch Me Mohair. So they look slightly different. Like this one is more gray, and this one is more white. But I'm not entirely sure if I want to move forward with it yet. It's also too warm right now to wear a sweater like this with alpaca or mohair. So this is something I will revisit in July or August. But thank you to everyone who has provided some input and feedback on which swatch they think they like better. It seems pretty split. There's no, it's not everyone going, I like the gray one or I like the white one. It's like, it seems very 50-50. So like, thanks for the help, guys. Just kidding. I appreciate your feedback, please. So this Esther cardigan will, fulfill my need to use Fisherman's Wool. Do I do this now? Do I wait till closer to fall? I don't know. Knowing me, I'll just work on like 5 projects at once because that seems to be a theme that I'm carrying on from last year. How do I slow down? The sun, wow. I have the opposite problem of other podcasters. Many people will, comment how they lack daylight when they are recording their videos. It could be, time of day that they're recording as well. But for me, I'm very lucky that I have southeast facing windows, so I can record as late as, 3 or 4 in the afternoon in like peak winter times. But yeah, I have the opposite problem. I have too much daylight. It's a good problem to have. And with that, guys, I gotta end it here. My sickness, it's getting to me, and my voice, my throat, all that. It's time for me to rest. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, guys. Let me know if you have any questions about the projects. Hopefully by the time this video releases, I will have this and all these new projects added to my website, and I'll link to that in the description if you guys have not visited my website. It's kind of like a portfolio page I've created. Information there, links to my Ravelry pages as well for everything. But yeah, hope you guys are well, stay well. I hope I'm better next time I sit down to record. But until next time, guys, happy knitting.